So in this shiur today, which Baruch Hashem thankfully is starting on time and not late, so hopefully we'll be able to cover what we want to cover and not go over time. So this is a bit of a hamshich, a bit of a continuation to the previous shiur. All right, the previous shiur, so Kehesin was discussing a topic of nida, pnuya mikvah, but as I mentioned there at the end, in short, due to time constraints, this is really more of a general question. There's a general question which is, can you be mevater? Can you do psharis? Can you meet people halfway? When you feel that's true, we're giving in a bit, but this might actually enable and help people do the right thing, and otherwise, without giving in, they might end up doing far worse. But this is actually essentially a thread that you find throughout many questions that arise in a Chabad House type setting, in all kinds of situations. Right, so on the one hand, you'll find sichos of the Rebbe, etc., where the Rebbe says pretty clearly, like a principle, that we, on principle, we never believe in psharis. We never, cut back and say, look, the times demand it, and let's try to meet the generation halfway. We're not being makar of Torah to people, we're being makar of people to the Torah. Right? So the subtext of these sichos is pretty clear that this is a bit of a criticism towards other, even if they're Orthodox, but more liberal strains of Orthodoxy perhaps, where they are more consciously saying, okay, we'll be about on this and be about on that, and we're declaring that it's not our derech. On the other hand, b'mitzias, it seems like there are all kinds of things in a Chabad House setting in which we do cut corners, so to say, or turn a blind eye. And many of these are said to have been with the Rebbe's agreement or the Rebbe's knowledge. So there's still room for someone who wants to come up with some kind of general overarching theory that will somehow be able to fit everything in and explain everything, whether in the halachic terms, see when according to halacha, when do poskim allow for this or for that, and also in terms of sociologically, how do we compare, how do we contrast ourselves to those other communities that we don't hold of their psharas? How do we differentiate? So, if it's possible to come up with such a theory. Now, I already mentioned the Kitzer last time that in every case, really, you have to ask anu, from das nai. First of all, what are we being mevater on? What are we foregoing? And how important is this thing? And how important would it maybe be that we should insist on it and actions it? And on the other hand, how severe is the thing we're trying to be matzah? What are we trying to save them from? How severe is that? And what is the potential for a mixture being created by giving in on something? Will that have unintended consequences? And that apparently, it's this calculus that's what the Pesach or the Rebbe, whoever is dealing with the Shaila, has to consider. And maybe it's not really something that you can ever put down on paper. It's really every case is its own question, and you need an authoritative authority who can be mechasher, like the Mishnah says, schar avera keneged hefseda, to figure out what and when and where. So, in continuation to that, we're going to discuss another discussion like that, also very relevant today. Not in Siman Kuf Pei Gimel in Nida, which we're learning, more like in the Siman Kuf Tzadiks later on. It is Hilchos Nida, which is relevant in a Chabad House setting. And I'd like to just give a thank you, a shout out to the Engelite who brought this subject to my awareness, some of the Makaitis. And I told them, and they're supposed to have a nice follow-up topic for the next year. So, Yashir Kayach to them. Last year, when we were finishing Mikvahs and starting Ribbis, so I quoted Tshuva, not in such a weighty topic, but I quoted Tshuva from an author by the name of Rav Chanan Aflalo. So he has a series of Shalos Tshuvas called Asher Chanan, Pasuk Yiladim Asher Chanan Alikim Esavdacha. He's released 9 volumes, and between the years Tafshin Samach Daled and Tafshin Ayin Vav. And they deal with a lot of relevant questions. A lot of them are actually very chomer, very severe questions. And he has original psakim. The if you search, anyone who does searches in databases, you're pretty much guaranteed to run into him, as we'll get to in a moment. Now, what is his exact stature, his exact status in the rabbinic halachic world in Eretz Yisrael? I don't know exactly. In the Sharblat, he writes, Dayan u'matz bebeis hadin u'beis hara oyom Moshe bat Yam. As far as I can tell, this is not a well-known institution. He has an online page where he describes himself as a dayan, a merit tzedek, an expert on fertility and medicine and mumminus and Even Ezer and childless and gynecological. So that's how he presents himself, but I haven't really seen that he's quoted, mentioned independently as an authority, as a famous Pesach or something. On the other hand, like I said, it's far more in all the databases. They're in Shraga, they're in Hebrew books. And when you search for relevant questions, you often run into his Svarim. And if you search, you'll find that about 100 new Svarim that have come out in the last 10 years are already quoting him, possibly because they also searched and found his Svarim. And although to some of them, surely he has to have some, some people who know him. Maybe some of them are familiar with him. Chanana Flalo. So I'm saying this to be Nizr and Kovid, could be a great Talmud Chacham. But on the other hand, not everything you find in a database is automatically, the Psak Din. So when it comes to important shilas, it's ungenommen that you have to turn to a chashuva, to a respected Pesach. And even though today more people are more likely to say, it's political, there's a lot of PR, but that was always the way it worked. Ultimately, you look at Shalos Tshuvos from different generations, and you always see there's a pyramid, there's a hierarchy, and the top shilas go to the top Pesach. So, the Rabbanim themselves have to know who to forward which questions to. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're searching, researching, and you end up in Yitzhak Chachma or Google. So after this introduction, let's get to the point. In Shut Asher Chanan Chelak Vav Zayin, one volume Chelak Vav Zayin, Yeridei Siman Chavei. So he writes the following to someone else in Bat Yam. He says, you were asked, your Beis Hira, that there's a couple that got into a very, very terrible fight, sichsuch, and the whole ishos, that was all out the window. None of that was taking place. So even when she could do a Hefsek Tahara, do Zayin Nekim, she didn't do it. But Lafi the cheshbon of what should be the seventh day after Hefsek Tahara, which she didn't do, on that day, punkt, everyone got involved, people, friends, etc. got involved. And they're really trying to bring the couple back together after months of no contact. And now the shaila is, can she just do a bedikos on the seventh day and go straight to the mikveh and skip all the previous, skip the Hefsek Tahara? So he writes, you're in your Beis Hira, you already have a precedent for being mekel in these types of situations, but only with an irreligious couple. When they're not really fully keeping Taras HaMishpacha yet, and you tell them, you need to do this, you need to do that, so they're probably just going to drop the whole thing. So then it's mekubal that's what you say. But in this case, this is a zug of b'nei Torah. The husband is an avrech. So l'chayra, you wouldn't say that it's okay. So I answered because he's putting it in writing. So I told you that my derech is not to be mechalek between b'nei Torah and others, because everyone in this generation struggles with nida and arayas, and chumra can bring to a kula, and I've heard that even from people, especially Balei Tshuva, he says that sometimes they end up being nichshel and nida mamish if you're machmer on things, and start distinguishing Balei Tshuva, not Balei Tshuva. Halachos are given to everyone. So now he starts getting into, so what is the case? What is the halachic case taka to be made here? So he starts by quoting an Rabbi Yehuda. He brings a bunch of Ma'ar Mekaymis. These Ma'ar Mekaymis you could already find the mashal before him in Taras Abayis, Bar Avadu Yosef. We have the set here, Chelik Beis. This discussion about, do you need a Hefsek Tahara kipshutoi or not? And this is a discussion that began in the Achreinim, starting from the Rabbi Yehuda, about what is the point, what is the definition of a Hefsek Tahara, why do we need it? And based on that, we can, in certain extreme cases of an afkamina, we can maybe be mekel if there's a problem. he just brings them bekitzer. I'll get into these first Makaitis a little bit more. So in Neida Yehuda Madurakama Yeridea Simon und Tess, so he starts, it's about a woman with a problem, with a makkah, but he starts off by asking a stira. The Mechaber in Simon Kuf Pei Zayin says if she has a makkah, ba'is makim, your toilet, it's the makkah. The Ramah says it has to be a vesis kavua. That way, once it's outside of the time of the vesis kavua, okay. Then you can be toilet on the makkah, even though she doesn't even know for sure that the makkah is mitzi dam. As long as you know there's a makkah, that's what it says in Simon Kuf Pei Zayin. Sounds very easy. But the Ramah in Simon Kuf Tzadik Aleph, which is actually a bit connected to some of what we were learning in Al Tarev and Simon Kuf Pei Gimel, a woman who sees dam in the Meir Aglayim and she feels pain when she's using the bathroom, I actually looked it up. Always curious when I see a laz. So it's German, Harnwind. Harnwind in English is strangury, which according to Wikipedia is painful, frequent urination of small volumes, slowly by straining and despite feeling you need to go. So that's the condition that the Ramah is mentioning. So let's say she has that condition and she's seeing dam. So the maskana of the Ramah is, he brings different opinions, but seemingly the maskana is yesh machmirin, only to be marked if she has a vesses, and she needs a bedika. That means she has to put moichnaki when she's going to the bathroom to make sure that we're separating the two sources, and then we can check and see if the blood is still coming out of the Meir Aglayim, and then it's talking from the Meir Aglayim, and not that it's also coming from the makar at the same time. If after using, or in other words, after she used the bathroom, she takes out the meich is clean. So right there, you see that it's two different things. That's how the Ramah ends. So the shaila is l'chayr it's a stira in Kuf Pei Zayin. It says toilam medam akasa. That's all you need. So in Kuf Tzadagav, the maskana is you can't just be toilet in the makkah and the Meir Aglayim, you have to do a whole bedika. So Dovid discusses this from different angles. Then he comes to this approach. He says, let's analyze the cases in each simon. In Simon Kuf Pei Zayin, he says that in Simon Kuf Pei Zayin, the simon is about Dudoya Machmas Tashmish. Right? So clearly, she came into this problem from being tahar. First she was tahar, and then this problem came up, and now we're discussing what to do. So because she's b'cheskas Tahara, she's coming from a chazaka of Tahara, so Mamela, so the makkah, mistam is mitzidam, and we keep her in her chazaka. And as long as you didn't prove otherwise that the makkah is befedish, not mitzidam, you make them. That's Simon Kuf Pei Zayin. Obviously she was tahar. Blood is coming to be mitzi her mitarasa. But in Simon Kuf Tzadik Aleph, we're talking about someone who sees Meir Aglayim, and obviously this is an ongoing problem, not a one-time incident. This is an ongoing problem. It's a condition. Zeh darka b'choles. So once she became a nida, now she's trapped. She's trapped in a state of nida. She can't do a bedika to clean herself. So she's trapped in a cheskas tuma. She can never start doing Nikiyim, counting Zayin Nikiyim, every time she uses the bathroom, which is, human beings fairly often. So, Mamela, she's seeing every time, and then every time she has a suffix, so she's stuck in the Cheskas Tumah. So that's why in Kuf Pei Zayin you don't need a bedika, and in Kuf Tzadik Aleph you do need a bedika. Now, getting back to the question that he was discussing, so the woman had a makkah, he said, even if there's a makkah gemura, avdafke Meir Aglayim, a makkah anywhere. And there's no way to do a bedika, to do a clean bedika, so then you can't get her out of the cheskas isser. Elamai, maybe you can use a sfek sveika, shema min atzadim, and then if it's min hamakah, shema min hamakah, because she's taining taka that the makkah, she feels the mata, the toich rachma. That itself is already getting into sfek sveikas over here. He says, if you look in the shach and Simon Kuf Yud, dinei sfek sveika, that Sfek Sveika against the Cheskas Isser, if the Cheskas Isser is the same problem as the Sfek Sveika, it's all the same thing, then the Shach says you can't use a Sfek Sveika against that same Cheskas Isser. There's a Taisus in Yevomis that says that a Nida is not really a Cheskas Isser B'chlal, because a Cheskas Isser would mean that she is always a Nida, but we know that women only see periodically. And now the Nida gets to what's the gather of Hefsek Tahara. He says, Hein Emes. Said that she sees every time she checks. He
Even if you want to say there's a svek or there's not really a cheskas iser, but loy paska betara klau. Kozman shle paska betara hamishna koira cheskas tuma. And he brings a raya from the Mishnah that you're in a cheskas tuma until you're pesekas betara. So the gather of the Hefsek Tahara isn't just a physical, technical, you just check and see what's going on. It's a conceptual thing. This literally takes her out of a cheskas tuma into ois cheskas tuma. And then we can advance from there. We'll see later, not everyone agrees to this. But this is how the Noda B'Yehuda is defining it. And this will have a big enough minute, as we shall see. Now, even if she has a cheskas tuma, some would paskin that you can use a sveka. But as I already explained elsewhere, that you still have to check, you have to test. And that's the problem here. That she never, every time she checks, she can never get a clean bedika. So ein kam bedika klal. So take it away. Now, the dam isn't making it worse necessarily. Maybe we want to be makel, but ein kan bedika hamavaredas taharasa. We're lacking. We're missing one bedika to be mavar the tahara. That's the purpose of the bedika, as we said. And she can never be bayadik. She can never be mafsik b'tahara. So ve'ech titar. All the svaras in the world as to why she should be considered tahar. But there's a din that you have to mevar the Tahara. Without this, so legally, she can never leave the status of cheskas tum. And now he gets to the punchline, which we're interested in. It's, hey, nemes, shebiyarti b'tshuva cheres. I explained it in another tshuva. She'ikar ha-bedika hi. What's the real point of the bedika? What happens during the bedika? What are you doing during the bedika? During the bedika, she pays attention lahargish im dam yotzim in hamakar. That's the real thing that's happening here. She's paying attention to see if dam is coming out or not. Imkein masha'einu merageshes shedam yotzim in hamakar mikri hefsek tahara. Oibazai, all you really need for hefsek tahara is to feel that dam isn't leaving the makar. The cleaning is just on top of that, but the real hefsek tahara is just not feeling that the dam is not coming out. Advarim Arukim, Yizbarim and Kaimam, and the Metzayin to earlier and some involved. But there's a huge chiddush here, right? So first he explained how important Hefsek Tahara is. You can't skip the Hefsek Tahara. But then he says, how you do the Hefsek Tahara doesn't matter so much. The main thing is, Noisenes Daita. That's enough. He continues, in this particular case, that's still not going to help when you never have a single clean bedika. So therefore, he says, the Maskana, you should tell her, maybe she can get at least one clean bedika, and then we can take it from there. So that's the Noda B'Yehuda. Who's the, huh?
Why can't you be cautious when she does have mikvah to make sure there's no argasha from the marker that she would just tell you?
So we're going to get to one of the poskim today raises that point that we've been discussing about is today different. And then this, but the Noda B'Yehuda is still going with that was also the Noda B'Yehuda. Some say for that era was also when they were talking about argasha and how argasha works, and that's a lot of that discussion as well, which we're not getting into in this year. So the other achrin from around that time that's presented as like the opposite of the Noda B'Yehuda is the Chavas Das. Chavas Das is on Yedidea. So more or less he agrees with the Noda B'Yehuda on the part about how it's important. You can't leave a cheskas toma without it, but he doesn't acknowledge this virtual Hefsek Tahara. So you look in the Chavas Das and Siman Kuf Tzadik Vav, B'Yorim, Sifkat and Gimel. So she says these Zayin Yom are supposed to be Nekiyim. You need at least one bedika, and then you can say these are Tahirin Usfurin. These are counted Tahardika days. Otherwise, what are you counting? What happened here? And he says it's mashma from the Gemara that if she didn't check herself, even if she wasn't margish, she's still Tmeya Deiraisa because you made Nekiyim Sfurin Ubedukin. He brings a raya from the Gemara. And he says also mashma from the Paiskim and the Beis Yosef and the Simon, because there's one Paiskim there, the Agur, or maybe the Keta begins with the Agur, maybe he quotes from someone else afterwards, that says, the Bedika, that by the way, this is a situation of Isser Kares. So you see from the attitude of the Paiskim that they're saying that the Hefsek Tahara itself is an issue of Isser Kares. So that's how you see it. It's their Isa. So it was
They only refer to one Hefsek Tahara.
okay.
Never refer to the next week.
Oh, that's the main. Trying to get past that. Let's get past that first. So it was if Shitaka saw dam and short sizer, it's not bedukin. The whole point is to make sure that there's no dam. Nan nekim ubdukin usfurin be'inan. That's what we need. So he says, if she saw dam mamish First there was taka dam, and then she has a makkah afterwards. Even though we know the makkah is being mitzi dam, but because of that makkah, she can never do a clean bedika. So then she's stuck as tmeya because we need sfurin ubedukin, and that's not happening here. If she can get at least 1 day of tahira, then we can say all the days are b'cheskes bedukin or tahira, and then we can say all the rest of the blood afterwards is because of the makkah. She has to have a hefsek tahara b'bedikas moich kadin. That's what he says. So he's emphasizing here you need a hefsek tahara b'bedikas moich. He's not giving any discounts. He goes on and on in this vein. So he agrees with the Neit Buddha again that you're trapped in a cheskas tumah. You have to get out of that. But he doesn't agree. He doesn't mention any possibility of the fact that she was married. He says a real hefsek tahara. No, he's not allowing, giving any allowances here. Now we get to the shut avnei miluim. So the avnei miluim, of course, is the shef shmaitza, the k'tzais, all those chashav svarim. So he also has shut avnei miluim. And he has an even more extreme shitta than the Neit Buddha. So he starts with the question: the woman couldn't become tired to her husband because she always saw ke'ein mare dam in the meiraglayim. It comes out of the meiraglayim. A few times she checked afterwards b'kinuach and she found dam then as well. But then she actually got past that. She already checked a few times, and after the meiraglayim she can get a clean bedika, but she's still stuck with the e and the meiraglayim over and over again. Sometimes it even comes out a little bit after the hatalas meiraglayim. First she was feeling pain, then she stopped feeling pain. And Ha'isha hitzavachas b'kol mar boichom yaleles b'mar nafsha. Her husband wants to divorce her. He's finished, and she's looking for a takana. All right, so that's to pile on the pressure for the rabbanim. So, and last, and he mentions Gam Aisha Hitmei Vadois from the last Re'iyah, meaning last we know she had her Re'iyah, and then she got stuck in this loop. So in the middle of the tshuva he writes Asad Chavas Das and Simon Kuf Sadak Vav that says that she needs a hefsek tahara bedika zayin akiyim. It says I don't think that's correct. And he says Kiven de b'shiva nekiyim loy mikre cheskas iser. Once you get to the Shev Nekiyim, it is not correct to say that the woman is in a Cheskas Isser. And he's mitzayin to Shev Shmaitza, Shargil, Parakid Aleph. This is the Taisvis right in the beginning of Gittin. Everyone surely knows it, hopefully remembers it. Eidach Adnamim B'Yisurin, Tamer Minolan, Yalfino Menida, B'Safra La'atzma, Evazoy, Afilu V'Schazak Yisura, Taisvis says. Taisvis says no, because she's not bechazaka that she sees perpetually. Once the shiva pass, tahira, so male loyes chazak yisura, and then the final line, begam b'yad the litbro. But Taisvis says that once you're out of the days of the re'iyah, it's not a cheskas iser. Right? They mentioned it, but then he said the alpha pikein calls man shlei paska batara mishnah kaira cheskas tuma, but the Avnei Miluim is leaning heavily on these Taisvis and the Taisvis. And Yavamas are the way they quoted, Afilu V'Schazak Yisura. No, why is Chazak Yisura Shetira Kach La'elam? So from here we see that it's not as Chazak Yisura if you see once, you'll see forever. So Ebazoi, B'yesh Lomaka, Ein Tzrichim Lahafsakas Tara, Lobedika B'zayin Akiyim. Strong words from the Avnei Miluim. And then he says, I believe not. No, I won't even stop there. I believe that even before the Hefsek Tahara, even before that stage where it's even shaykh to do Hefsek Tahara, there's no Cheskas Isser. Even in the Yoim Rishon, the Mayan Pesuach, even when she's mamish in the midst of seeing, it's still not called a Cheskas Tumah. He brings the Ran, also in that Sugya and Gittin, and the Ran throws in, what about if person nida ime b'mita? What if the husband was literally a witness to the fact that she's a nida, so it's not just all going on her say-so. So the Avnei Miluim says, if you say that as long as she doesn't have Hefsek Tahara, she's b'cheskas tumah v'adois, if person nida ime b'mita, so how can she then be nama to say shefsika b'tara einach namim b'yisura and heichad is chazak yisura? So from here we see that even b'yom rishon, before the Hefsek Tahara, it's not a cheskas isur vada. As I know the Neit Buddha himself, Pshitale, that as long as she didn't do Hefsek Tahara, she's b'cheskas tameh. But Eikar Kamesh Kasafti, that even before the Hefsek Tahara, Eina b'cheskas tumah v'ados. He says the one part of the Neit Buddha I'll accept is the other part. The main thing that the Rebbe says in Siman Test that Ikar Bedika they send us daita lahargish dam yetzim and amakar, etc. So he says Bazoi, even before the makkah heals, she could do a Hefsek Tahara. She send us daita lahargish and miftach makar dam yetzim and amakar. Right, it's the same way she can be margish that the dam is coming from the makkah. So she can feel if it's coming from the marker, and if she doesn't feel it's coming from the marker, that's a Hefsek Tahara or bedika teich zayin akiyim. Otherwise, she'll never become lav hachiyat ha'isra lo'elam, and that's his raya that it can't be. The mice in that case, they said she could do bedikos. So in that particular case, the Eisfer is she should do the bedika in the Ramah and Simon Kuf Tzadik Aleph to when she uses the bathroom to put in the moich. Why not? You can do it. He emphasizes that you should do it with Nashim Bekiyas to make sure, because most women won't know exactly how to do it, how much to fill. They'll do it right, etc. And says, after that, let me know, update me then. And he signs, Ayalev HaKoyen, Bal Machaber, Sefer Ksesa Choshen, Meshav Shmeitz. If you look in Pesach Tshuva and Siman Kuf Tzadik Vav, so another big makkah here is the Chassam Sefer. We're not going to get into it. We're just going to quote it, the Kitzer, from the way the Pesach Tshuva quotes it there on the page in Kuf Tzadik Vav. He says, see the Chavis Das, I am in Tshuva Chassam Sefer, and then he quotes the Maskon of the Chassam Sefer was that the woman's not seeing now, and she got a makkah. Only in particular cases, the Chassam Sefer does acknowledge, or at least in particular cases, he says that if she has a makkah now, you can say Mistama Kvar Sasa Mekaira, so then she could do a Hefsek Tahara, but even Shetamid Kol Ben Hashmashis Behesach Hadas Mikol Hirhurim Machshavas. If she stands the whole Ben Hashmashis and she's taking her mind off everything else, but Tashkiach Al Atzma, and she'll pay attention, be in tune to be fully present. The Imlay Targish Oz Psichas Hamakar Tifsik Betara V'Titar. Okay, so you see the Chassam Sefer is also open to this in particular cases. Now, there are other achrayim afterwards that discuss this. We're going to leave this discussion at that. But Pa'al Mamash, Rabbi Yosef brings these inyanim and Taras Habayis as something you could rely on in a situation where a bedika with an aid is not possible. But practically speaking, it seems that today bedikos could check and prove that there is a makkah and what the makkah is doing. It doesn't have to be a mystery. And that can probably generally solve the problem and prove what you need to prove. Now, like I mentioned before, it's interesting to point out that in the Shalos Tshuvas, Divrei Yatziv, the Kleisenberger, Yeridei Simon Koval, he points out that, hey, Zman Hazeh, we dachtayne that the leg, Hargosh, the Psichas Pi Hamakar, in a regular case of an the woman's not in tune to when it is coming out. And still, we say that doesn't matter. Foolish labor, Hargosha, it's still, we still have Din Nida. Some Cain, beloy bedika, if you didn't do a bedika now, actually misbaitinus, she'ena merageshes, k'mei shekosov Chassam Sefer, what would that prove anything? If we go with this vert that can't be margish, so that knocks off this whole vert on a practical level. But like I said, I don't think this is really a relevant discussion, a practical discussion anymore in the context of a makkah. And whatever the case is, of course, if there's a shaila, of course, you go to a very serious paisik, as Silfarkash emphasizes in the appropriate chapters in Tarak Halacha. Whenever it's these and yanim, take it very seriously. So back to the Asher Chanan. Asher Chanan says, okay, so we have this discussion, but L'chayr doesn't really fit here, right? Because she was fighting her husband, and if she didn't do a Hefsek Tahara, b'payal mamish, physically, you think she stopped and thought about it? They're only talking about a makkah, and then you tell her to focus on it. It's not so shy. Okay? But there's another famous tshuva in this realm, these discussions, the Zichron Yosef. The Zichron Yosef, the author is Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt, and there's a correspondence there between him and Rabbi Yosef Tuumim of Breslau. And this vart arises over there that B'chlal we know that every woman only sees Nida for a set amount of days. There's this concept in Nida where the husband is away, so he can make a whole cheshbon, chashav yimei vast. He makes the whole entire calculation, and when he comes home after what he calculates is her usual cycle, so he can come home and be bala under sleep. Of course, the discussion is how to sleep aloud, but at least in theory, he doesn't have to ask her, "Are you tar?" He can just go with that cheshbon. So So you see in halacha, we sometimes just assume that things are running along on their usual cycle. So after 5-6 days, the chances that she's still really seeing blood for real is a miyuta de miyuta. He says about Yosef, brings us also in Taharas Habayis, and he says, yeah, there's a big yesod to the Zichron Yosef, that we follow the Rav. So after 6 days, the Hefsek Tahara is no longer a deraisa because most women don't see anymore after 5-6 days. There's a cheskas tuma, but there's a Rav. A Rav can overcome a chazaka. We just introduced the Rav. So Ruba Adif, that's its own discussion. We're not going to get too into. I'll just know that the Tzemach Tzedek actually in Yerdei Simukuf Chav Gimel quotes part of the Zichron Yosef. Part of the Zichron Yosef's psak was that in some situations maybe you don't have to do a deep bedika. You could do a surface bedika. And the Tzemach Tzedek is quoting it in the context where this would be helpful. Right, so he says, Tzemach Tzedek says there in Simukuf Chav Gimel that Tivdikas Atzma is not going to help Timtza Dam, and she doesn't check. So then, where's the Hefsek Tahara? Should Zichron Yosef Chelik Yerdei Siman Yud is Meikol Bedekas Neged Pesach HaCheder, a more superficial bedika, and gets into those who disagree. There's that, but it seems like the Maskanat Tzemach Tzedek there is that you could go with Zichron Yosef, and in the Kitzer at the end it says Yesh Lahiris K'tshuva Zichron Yosef. So.
It's not like a quinoa. That's already like not everyone agrees that quinoa is a big.
Right, so I'm not getting into the pratim of exactly, that's like a side note. Just the Zichron Yosef has this point about the Rav, that Rav women don't see past 5-6 days, so male at that point, there is no cheskas tuma anyway, so then the Hefsek Tahara is a lot less important. Okay, so Ashur says, based on this, he says, I would say that today most women are pretty aware once the Yomel Hamaluch Lochem end. He says, you can change the pads. When it's the flow, they have a thick pad. After that, they switch it to something else, calls it a tachtonit. And that's more normal thing to put inside. So you see that the woman herself is in touch and is aware that the real hefsek, that she is mafsek in her damim. Then he throws in bechlal, nasham or becheska zavis. So bechlal hefsek tahara is midrabanan. And then he says that if it was in another song, it says bechlal, women go to the bathroom a lot, morning, afternoon, and evening, and there's a kinuach. So maybe the kinuach could count as a bedika. That's a whole other discussion. But he says, B'hasal kin, and his maskana is that b'shas tcha gadol, like in this case, that they're in a fight and they're about to get divorced, and now they're trying to bring shalom back, and now they want to come back together. And that's, of course, the main element of a marriage. So if we can be mitzaref, the Zichron Yosef, and the kinuach, so, and the Sofik Zavis, so, if you can avire that the 5-6 days passed and the 7 days passed, she can be tayvel now. She can do a bedika now and be tayvel now, even without the Hefsek Tahara and all the other bedikas. Of course, it's an urgent situation, and I don't see, he says, a distinction between a Haredi and a Chiloni in such a very sensitive situation. Who knows what the outcome will be if we say no? And he says, B'chlal, women, Harediyot, that do have Hefsek Tahara, even if they officially didn't do it because they're in a fight, but surely deep down they're in tune, they're aware. So maybe that can also fit in. That was his psak. So of course, sounds like a fairly major chiddush. Turns out that of all the tshuvas in Asher Chanan, which I said that hasn't necessarily gotten major recognition, this tshuva turns out got some very harsh pushback. Very, very sharp. You can find it in the sefer of another young Rav by the name of Harav Yaniv Nasir. And we'll see it's not just him, because he also he went and recruited some bigger names at the end, as we'll get to. He printed it in one of the Kaiftzim, and then he included it in his Sfarim. So he says, in this case, the Asher Chanan, Chelek Vav and Zion, was asked about this, recaps the story, recaps the issue. So he says he's mekel that you can skip everything else because it's It's Dirabanon, Safek Zavis, Zichron Yosef, this is Man Kavua. Once you pass those days, it's Dirabanon, plus an Edi Yehuda, that if you can't do Hefsek Tahara, it's enough that you think about it. She didn't think about it, but no, they put the pad, so you see they are in touch. And what about the Kinuach? And you shouldn't distinguish between a Chiloni and an Avrech, because the question there is about an Avrech. So Rabbi Niv Nasir says, Mchilas Kvei Terasoi, Dvarov Tmuhim. Very strange. And I say that Dvarov Elu Nitnu Leheomer, Kol Shekain Lehikasev, this is not something that should be said, and it's never mind to be written. And I can't imagine that he's going to be makel against all the Paiskim in the Chumrah of Nida, which is, of course, based on Kares, based on Gibuve Svaras, just throwing a bunch of Svaras around like that. So the Neit Yehuda himself wasn't actually makel like that. Since the Neit Yehuda was makel in a very severe case where she mamish can never become tar, then she could pay attention. But this woman over here, she didn't think about it. The pad, Bakar, she's putting another pad, so she knows she's still not clean. Just because you think that now it's less of a problem, but you're putting some pad there, so obviously you still think there's something there. Not everyone is putting it stam for not blood reasons. Maybe some women will have it all the time for other lechos, but not everyone. Some people it's just for the end when it's still tipus dam. So she didn't think she was clean. And anyway, even if you accept everything he says, but she did not stand there and concentrate and think and focus to feel the dam is not being zav, and that's what they described. That's what they said is required. Not what he's describing. That's his own leap. One of the leaps he's making. And B'chal, these places can only talk about it in very severe cases where she won't be the tahir in any other way. She doesn't have the possibility of doing a Hefsek Tahara because she has a makkah. And Avram Eluim said, you saw in the Shiloh, the husband is threatening and she's crying. Mashenkin in Stam case. Right? So sometimes in specific cases, let's say Basula, one of the how does the Basula B'chal do a Hefsek Tahara? She can't go b'chayrin b'stakim, so that's the Siddhei Torah says maybe that's a case where we also rely on this vart. The only way for her to be mitar is in this way. There is no alternative. She's a psula. Otherwise, how's the kala going to become tar? But otherwise, in a normal situation, of course, we don't budge from Reva Paiskim, the Shulchan Aruch. Hefsek Tahara, first day, seventh day has to be bedikos gemuras, chayrim u'bestakim. If there's an issue, a makkah, something, then you can go to a Rav. But what's this? Then he gets into the Chassam Sofer and says, weiter, the way the Chassam Sofer describes it is shetamid sha'achas tasiach daita. You're just talking about a woman. She walked into the bathroom, she threw the pad here, she looked at that's not comparable in any way. And especially, you're saying that she was b'chal in a fight. And it wasn't the first month she was in a fight. She was in a fight for a few months. So she's probably, and she hasn't been doing anything those few months. So about the whole thing is off her mind entirely. She had no way of anticipating that all of a sudden they're going to reconciliate. He says, it's very strange that he wasn't even mevayer. It sounds like, at least speak to the woman, try to ask, try to find out. The Asher Khan just saying, we just assumed that she was aware and you right to confirm. How can you say that? He says, there is entire Sabayas of Adi Yosef does write the following. In Chelik Beis he writes that there's my name or in a Sena Harabim, a woman comes to the mikveh and they speak to the mashkicha, and the mashkicha realizes that she didn't do Hefsek Tahara and she didn't do the bedikos. If she doesn't let her go in right now, the woman might be insulted, nifgat, and she'll just go home and she'll never come back again. And then there'll be nikshal and kares for a very long period of time. So because it's a very personal, individual case, it doesn't seem like this will lead to a widespread mikshal. So Mamela Rabbi Yosef says, right, no one else can tell, no one else has a clue. It's not like it's something obvious, like a pnuya walking into the mikveh where people know what's going on. This is just this individual. We don't know what they did at home or not. So because you have the Zichron Yosef and these ideas, the Rav, so tucha lahalim ayin mashkicha, mikveh lady can turn a blind eye and let her go in, and once she comes out, then say, by the way, for the future, you have to do this, and that. So Rabbi Yosef did say this, and he's not going to start up with that. But weiter, that's talking about a woman who mamish doesn't know about anything, or she's just not ready to do anything, and we're of a much bigger concern. But here she knows, you can't compare it directly, that's for sure. She knows, of course, about all the halachas talking about a younger man's wife. And here you're going to be able to just turn the blind eye. How does that work? And he says, if you look in the context of the Tahara Sabayas, the whole discussion earlier is that this discussion, can you be makel and an Isser Kal in order not to be nichshel and Isser Chamer, which I also quoted last week from Charles Chuvas Yaviyah Emer. Didn't have that much time then. We don't have that much time now at this point. But this idea that can you just be makel? And he quotes there from the Meish of Dovid and Etziv, about the woman who didn't go to the mikveh and she was living be'isser, and now she wants to change her ways, but she wants to toivel on the 8th day. She doesn't want to be seen with other women. She's embarrassed. So the Netziv was thinking to be makel, and then he gets into the whole shaila of Yul b'shchayrim. Does that mean if Levi shchayrim, he could do whatever he wants, like taka, then it's fine? Or no, he's going to be Levi shchayrim, and then he'll realize, I really shouldn't be doing this. Different Yishayim say different things, but there's the concept of Levi shchayrim is that you're trying to be nichshel in less of a thing than you would if you'd be nichshel over here. So this is this big general question that the Rabbi is quoting from the Meish of Dover, and he concludes, the Meish of Dover concludes, Shalahater Isser Kal b'Shvil Isser Chamor Tzarech Liyas Masan Harbe. You have to be really, really careful. Just like in Refuas Aguf, sometimes the doctor makes a decision to do an amputation. That's how you have to look at it. You're amputating the Torah over here to save someone's greater spiritual life. So take it as seriously as that, the Netziv says. And that's what Rabbi Yosef is quoting in the Yaviyah. I mean, that's what he's quoting here in Tahara Sabayas. And then right after the Tahara Sabayas, he segues into, okay, so if the woman comes to the mikveh, etc., etc. So he says, it's pretty clear, Rabbi Yosef holds, of course she's being over on an Isser. Elamai, you have a calculus, you made a calculation that to save her from a better mikshel, from a bigger mikshel. But Stamazoi, how do you get to these other cases that you're talking about? He concludes, therefore you have to tell her that no, of course, if this case ever comes up with a younger man, she has to have Hefsek Tahara, Kedas V'Kadin, Count Zayin Akim, and that's it. Now, at the end, he says, I didn't just suffice with writing my own beer. I decided to get higher ups involved. So first we went to one Rav, but then he says, the Ikers I looked in Asher Chanan, he says, and looked at his Haskamas. So in Chelik Vav Zayin, he still has Haskamas. And one of the Haskamas is Rav Tzion Bo'aron. Rav Tzion Bo'aron is a big name, the based in Haggadah. So, of course, we know B'chal Haskama doesn't always mean that they actually are, Haskamas don't equal endorsements. Because who has time to go through a whole Sefer, hopefully even a portion of the Sefer. But anyway, from the Haskama, but Tzion Bo'aron's Haskama punkt happens to have a lot of ha'aris on it. It sounds like he went through the Sefer. So, I went into his office, El Tafshin Ayin Hey, discussed a few things with him, including this, and as soon as he heard his name, said, I was only masking on other portions of his Sefer, not on this portion, become a Sibis, and then he was telling me about Charifos, about this case, and what the Asher Chanan says, and of course there's no Hava in it to be Mekel, and he says other Tmiyas and other things in this Sefer as well, so he said, give me your tshuva that you wrote up, and then he'll be mitzaref in Ksaviyad, and he was mitzaref this following note, Nizdazati liris, what it says in Asher Chanan, Chelavam Chelik Zayin, Lahakal Hefsek Tahara, Dover Anegel, Isser Kares, Yisaydis Hatara, and the Daiti, we shouldn't even get into a halachic discussion about this Inyan Chamor, because the Tetzah the results will be terrible. This is going to create tremendous machshelas in a generation like this. I'll just say that the fact that he says that women have a pad and therefore there's makom to be mekel, he says, what are you talking about? There's been moich since the time of Chazal. You're saying all of a sudden now we have pads. No one ever mentioned this back then. So Seif Dover and he has daiti, it's a pirtza chamura, aser behachlet, rely on it, tail move of a talim, and he signed this in Cheshvan Tafshin Ayin Vav. But that was the pushback against this tshuva. So let's just conclude. First of all, in Asher Chanan, also in this Sefer, elsewhere, Halacha l'Moshe of Nasir, he has other hasagas on Asher Khan, on Asher Khan is matri to daven in pajamas, because as long as you're fully dressed, it doesn't matter how you're dressed, he attacks him on that also. In Chelik Ches of Asher Khan, I found that he has a response, Simon and Ches, but there's not much there. He just is very, very wounded and hurt and feels very insulted that people are going after him, and he doesn't want to dignify with a response. And B'chlal, Chelik Ches and Chelik Tes don't seem to have askamas anymore, and he has some like very, very wounded hakdamas where he just goes all out against his enemies. So that's that. In conclusion, what do we take away from this? Number one, you have to be careful with psakim you find in Eitzei Chachma. That's number one. Especially since you might not be able to search and find the other sefer that rips them apart. Number two, in a case of a Beis Chabad, if a woman, like the Rabbi Yosef described, a woman comes in and she's not fully on board, at least according to Rabbi Yosef, we have this possibility that maybe not to say anything. Even though, as Rav Nasir tried to explain, it's not really be'emes ladin, it's you're being over on a nisser. And I actually saw another sefer that also says that Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Mitzion Abba Shaul also said that it's fine. And in a case like that, to let them go ahead. And number three, once again, we see that this whole idea of a kula to save someone from a mikshal is very complicated, and there are no straightforward rules. Just final 10 seconds to point out, as you know, I pointed out that we also have a famous limud zchus of the Rebbe, that to do a shidduch with a ben hanida, that they're not really bnei hanida, because nowadays the Rebbe says, especially in America, we see that women are always swimming or in the ocean, here, there. The Rabbi gave this limud zchus. It's an igros chelik ches and an igros chelik yud. It's important in Shulchan Menachem and Even Ezer. There's also Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Igros Moshe also wrote a similar limud zchus. So ule yesh leima, you can be mitzayim that just explains the tefillah. It doesn't get into what about before the tefillah. So yesh leima, that at least there's an additional limud zchus here as well.